Hello and welcome to the Cruising Altitude. I'm making this video to walk through our journey from the United States to the United Kingdom with my dog. We'll cover why we ended up choosing a semi-private airline, K9Jets, why we weren't able to fly commercial jets, and so forth. So let's get on with it. First up is researching airlines. So the first thing to mention here is that any commercial flight flying into the United Kingdom will not accept dogs in cabin unless they are service dogs. It's a bit of a blanket statement there, but ultimately, if it's a pet, it goes in the hold. And so for me, my dog, his stress levels, and I think most dogs really, we weren't prepared to put him in the hold. So we immediately stopped looking at commercial flights from the United States into the UK and began researching other options, which meant flying from the US into a European place first, like France, for example, or Germany, because they have a little bit separate rules there. So any research I've done on commercial airlines is based on flying from either the US or Canada into France primarily. One thing to note here is the research in this video was done from October 2024 and before that. So please, if you're looking to travel, just double check with the airlines and make sure the rules are still the same. They can vary quite a lot and they seem to change a fair bit from when I was reading articles to calling the airlines to reading online. So please do your own research if you are traveling in this manner. So I'll get a little bit of information from the research I did, but as mentioned, please do your own research and note that these may have changed. I'll pick out a couple of tidbits from what I've looked at. So, for example, from Newark to Charles de Gaulle on Delta or Air France, they seem to be the same at this time. The max weight for a pet, including carrier, was 8 kilograms and 17.64 pounds. That's including the carrier. And the max dimensions could be 18 by 11 by 9.5 inches, which is quite small in my opinion, but that was Delta and Air France. French Bee offered the same weight limitations, but the dimensions of the carrier bags you could take on were a little bit smaller by say 2 centimeters to 5 centimeters on each side. So if you have a smaller dog, that might be another option for you, but they were a little bit smaller. The other options we looked at were United and JetBlue, who said that they don't have a weight restriction. However, their dimensions for the carrier were 9 by 17.5 by 12 with a hard case, or 11 by 18 by 11 inches for a soft case, and that was with United. JetBlue offered one at 17 by 12.5 by 8.5 inches. Again, we're talking small dogs here, right? If you've got anything, I have a Shih Tzu and there's no way he would be comfortable, be able to move around in these cases in aircraft, which ultimately was why we ended up looking down other routes. There is a slight caveat here in that there was an airline called, or there is an airline called La Compagnie. And at the time when I was researching this, they allowed dogs up to 33 pounds, maybe a little bit over that, but it was fantastic. They were a business class jet that flew from New York into Paris. They allowed dogs out of their carriers. They were quite lax in those rules. So it was like a middleman between the commercial airlines that were quite strict, the private jets, which were pretty pricey, and then you had La Compagnie in the middle. When we were looking to book this and doing all of our research, we were in the week where we'd done all our research, we were ready to book it. I go on La Compagnie to just check the prices, make sure the flights were still available, and this big pop-up came up and said the rules have changed, and they unfortunately dropped the weight down to 8 kilogram, which is, they've listed it as 18 pounds basically. So we couldn't travel. My dog's a little bit heavier than that. So unfortunately, we had to then do more research down the private, semi-private side because we had exhausted all options with commercial airlines. So just to say, if you have a dog that fits that weight limitation, have a look at La Compagnie because they were a fantastic option, at least before they changed the weight limitation on that, unfortunately for us. So now we were down to 2 basic options, which were, well, 3 options, which were the Queen Mary 2, which allows dogs on their transatlantic journeys, a private jet, and a semi-private jet, dog airlines, whichever you want to call them. So to talk about the Queen Mary 2 quickly, we've traveled on the Queen Mary 2. You've probably seen the videos in this channel before I had my dog. It's a fantastic journey, but if you have a stressed dog, I would not recommend it. Can get quite rocky. The cages make a little bit of a rattling sound. So if you have a nervous dog, I just don't think it's a suitable environment for them. If you've got a happy dog that loves other dogs and has friends and is pretty chill, then it is another option for you, but we didn't really go down that route. And we'd already researched that a couple of years ago to go on a vacation, but ultimately didn't choose that path. So just to let you know that Queen Mary 2 could be an option for you. There's also quite a bit of a waiting time frame, I think, if you're looking to go on a particular journey. So if that's something you're interested in, I'd reach out to them as soon as possible. Now, let's get to the bit that we're really going to talk about here, which is the private versus semi-private airlines. And again, I've mentioned at the beginning of this video, but we ultimately chose K9Jets. So just quickly, the private jet companies that advertised pet-friendly journeys were through Empty Leg and jets like VistaJet, and there were a bunch of others that we were looking at. However, I found it a little bit difficult to get the information. It was, you had to send an email, you waited for an email back, they'd give you a quote, they'd let you know when there was an aircraft free. And like with everything else going on, it was just a little bit too much for us. It was a little bit stressful. I wanted to book something, in the same manner you might book a trip to Vegas from LA. I know this is not quite the same, but I didn't want the extra work of like working back and forth, not knowing the price, waiting for the price to come back and then saying, oh, that's too expensive, or whatever it might have been. So basically we looked at the private jets that showed that they offered like pet friendly flights, and VistaJet looked great for that if that's something you're into. But ultimately then from that research we found Bark Air and K9Jets, both of which were pretty on par with each other. There was a reason why we wanted to go with K9Jets, but it doesn't make one any better than the other. So I've mentioned before, I've got a pretty nervous dog, and so trying to get him back was a bit of a struggle, trying to find the right airline, the right way to do it, basically. And when researching Bark Air first, all the videos I watched, the air hostesses looked fantastic, but they were very hands-on. They were throwing balls for dogs, and they were giving blueberry facials, and they were handing out treats every 2 seconds. And it, like, if you have a dog that loves that, honestly, looks amazing. But I just kept thinking, I need an aircraft where these dogs are just going to be like relaxed and calm and sitting down and not particularly like moving around the cabin too much. It was a lot to ask for, but I needed an airline that was a little bit more calmer, and Bark Air looked a bit more excitable. They were handing out like goodie bags with balls in, and that's what it looked like anyway on these videos I watched. So then we looked at the videos on K9Jets, and they seemed to be a little bit more relaxed. They were making sure that the cabin was safe, the dogs were safe, that everybody got there from A to B, but there was a little bit less of the blueberry facials and the dog toy throwing and the squeaking and all of that. Now, obviously, watching a video versus being on the aircraft is very different. Things can change. The air stewards might be different, so it's a bit of a blanket statement, but that was one of the reasons why I started going down the pathway of looking at K9Jets over Bark Air, just because of my particular situation. So my next step then was to call K9Jets and ask questions about the pricing and how it worked and booking and all of that. So I called up and was actually surprised that the founder of the company, Adam, picked up the phone, and I asked him every question I could think of, which I wish I could remember the questions I asked at the time, but it was about, how do I get to the airport? Where is it? What does the flight look like? How do I deal with sitting on the aircraft if he gets nervous? This is the first time he's been on an airplane. I don't know. We've never been in that situation before, and he's quite a nervous dog. So ask questions about that. How do we navigate that? Payment. It's a lot of money for these flights. They're not cheap. Like, can the payments be split? How many seats are left? Is the flight confirmed? And so forth. So ultimately, with these private or semi-private airlines, they basically have to have a certain number of people booked on the flight before they'll confirm it to fly. So when we were looking at flights out around December 24, we noticed some of the aircrafts, like end of November, were maybe had 4 passengers in it and needed an extra, let's say 6 passengers in order to fly. And then in December, there was a few more that had like 1 seat left, but were actually confirmed. So at that point, they had enough people to fly, and it didn't really matter if that last person booked the seat or not. So something for us, because we were worried about like the health certificates and the time frame around that, which I will cover a little bit later in this video. it was like, we need to make sure I'm renting out my house. So the timing of that and making sure like all the ducks had to be in a row and the timing. So we wanted to make sure that when we were picking a flight that it was already confirmed or that it was like 99% full. So the chance of it not flying were pretty slim. I don't know if, obviously, I don't know if any K9 Jet flights haven't taken off. I've never heard it in all the times I've researched them prior to traveling, and I was watching all of their social media and everything pre-travel. So yeah, so it's just something to keep in note when you're looking. If you're any person on the flight, just be aware that there's a little bit of flexibility there. There is a chance that it might not fly, or you might get put onto a different aircraft and so forth. So just to note that. So now when it comes to the booking, I mentioned I spoke to Adam about split payment and all of that, which you can do. I don't put words in my mouth, but I believe we were able to split the payment in two. I don't know if we can split that in 3 or 4 payments. We were pretty close to the travel date when I ended up booking this, so that might have been why I could only split it in two. It's definitely worth asking, but I know I split it in two. Don't know if you can do it any more, like any more payments than that at this time. So basically, Adam sent over the booking link where I provided the microchip number for my dog and his rabies certificate, and then he sent over 2 links to make the payments. So they were done pretty quickly, and then Adam was able to reach out to me and say everything had gone through. He then told me about a company called Positive Pet Health Certificates. Again, I'll cover this in the video, who ultimately help with getting all the paperwork needed for your dog to travel, and recommend them 10,000%. Took so much stress off us. So once I'd sent over the information to K9Jets, which was the microchip number, the rabies certificates, and then made the payments, the full payment, I was then confirmed basically with a booking number. One thing to note here is you're not officially confirmed to fly until you get all of your paperwork back for your dog, which is basically 48 to 24 hours before. It was one of the reasons why I wanted to go through the Positive Pet Health Certificate companies, because I had no idea what I was doing paperwork wise, and it's pretty overwhelming when you read the websites that give you all the information. They basically take the wheel, drive the car for you, and get all the paperwork done on time. They liaise with K9 Jets, they liaise with the vets, they help you with appointments, they make sure that all the forms are filled out correctly by the vet. I couldn't recommend them enough, so I'm going to talk about them in the next section. Here we are. So positivepethealthcertificates.com. Note I've put the spelling of that on the page because it's positive as in like pet paws, feet, pads, paws, P-A-W-S, positive pet health certificates, which is really cute. But I reached out to them, had an initial call with them, let them know when I was flying that I needed a bit of assistance, and they offered a package which was $375. They basically work as the middleman in between you, the vet, the paperwork, and the vet company that basically approve your dog to fly. I think it's USDA. And so they help to cross the T's, dot the I's. They make sure that the paperwork is filled out correctly by the vet that you go to. They make sure you use an accredited vet. They liaise with K9 Jets to keep them up to date. They're just fantastic. Honestly, if this is the first time you've flown, or even if it's not, the rules and regulations about traveling with pets can be quite confusing. And so they just take all of that stress away. And all you really have to do is turn up to the appointments, answer questions, that's it from my perspective. So they were really amazing. So there are a couple of things that they noted to me. One was that the microchip number had to be the 15-digit ISO compliant microchip. I believe they had some workarounds if you had another microchip, or they would say to get a different microchip put in, but ultimately that was the rule at the time. The other was the rabies injection. It had to have been administered at least 21 days before arrival into the UK. And if you have a dog with a 3-year rabies vaccination, you had to have the original certificate. Basically, for me, I just located every rabies vaccine that my dog had, from the very first one to the next booster shot to the 3-year and so forth, and just provided it chronologically, so they had everything, which worked perfectly. They then provided us with a list of USDA accredited vets in our zip code area, basically, and we were to call them and make an appointment. They provided us with a list of dates, or like a time frame of dates, to get this appointment done by. because we were traveling from Florida up to New York, we needed to make sure the paperwork was back in time, but we also needed to make sure that we fit into the 10-day health certificate arrival time. So basically, your paperwork is only valid for 10 days, and you have to arrive within 10 days of receiving that paperwork. But there's a lot of like time limits around this. So being provided those dates and get the assistance from positive pet health certificates was quite helpful. Now, there's a little caveat here. There's always a caveat, isn't there? They gave us a list of about 20 vets in the area. So, of course, pick the top one. I was checking the reviews as well on Google just to make sure it was like a reasonably good vet. Anything under 4 stars, I didn't really want to go to. So, there were a few I plucked out that I didn't choose. Ultimately, then made a list of about 10 vets, called the first one. They no longer did health certificates. Okay, next one on the list, call them. The lady that's approved to do the health certificate examination and paperwork was on vacation the 2 days that we needed this done. Okay, number 3, call them. They told me that they can do it, but they would need a full day, basically like a 15-hour day, to take my dog in. They basically leave him in one of the cages or kennels, whatever you call it, and they would take him out and do an examination. Then they'd put him back in, and then they would take him out like when they were free. Basically, they would pull him out to do like a test every so often when they had the time, but he had to stay there for 15 hours. Now, I've never done this before. I didn't know what to expect, but to me, that seemed a little bit extreme. I couldn't quite figure out why they needed him there for 15 hours or all day, as they mentioned. This isn't anything mind-blowing. The tests are not that extensive, so I'm not quite sure why. For me, it felt like they didn't really know what they were talking about, if I'm being honest. This was a vet in Orlando, Florida. So gave positive pet health certificates a call and just asked them, and they said, no, that's a bit unusual. So then we went back to the drawing board. They then helped me find another vet, gave them a call, and ended up booking an appointment with them. One caveat here is that because this wasn't my vet, because my vet weren't able to provide health certificates, I had to go to an appointment before the health certificate appointment to establish a relationship. Ultimately, in that very first like introduction appointment, they basically did the health certificate check then. And then when we went back the next day, they just double checked everything. The test itself was fairly straightforward. They were checking his ears, they checked his temperature, they checked his teeth, they checked his heart rate. I don't know what I was expecting. I think from the price, I was expecting a lot of like machines and hands-on, and it'd be quite a scary experience for my dog. But it wasn't that bad to get through it all. There was a little bit of advice given to us for like his stress levels and things like that. And then ultimately that was it. We left, and the paperwork was left with the vet, and then it was between positive pet health certificate and the vet to get the paperwork done. There were a few things that the positive pet health certificate, that's such a mouthful, noticed. One was one of the certificates that I was provided by his previous vet in another state hadn't filled out like one line on the paper correctly. So they called that vet, got that rectified, got an updated certificate sent through. They fixed that, so we had all the right paperwork. And then the next step was basically to pack up, right, and travel up to New York, which I'll talk about next because we took about 2 days to drive up there. So let's talk about it. Oops, okay, I missed something out here. So we're going back to the health certificate section for a second. But the paperwork itself, so what happens is you go to the vet, they do the test, they have the paperwork. Your vet fills out the paperwork with everything. That paperwork then gets sent over to USDA, I believe. USDA check it, they stamp it, they send it back to your vet, they hand it to you. You then take that paperwork to your final vet appointment for the worming treatment. They then officially like rubber stamp it. That's the point where your health certificate work is done. You then let the airline know and you're approved to travel. That's like elementary term explanation. But because we were driving up to New Jersey, positive pet health certificate worked with the vets in both Florida and New Jersey to make sure we got the paperwork on time. So they basically arranged for the vet in Florida to get the paperwork to FedEx by a certain time and date, and they were really on them, like making sure, like, hey, you've got to get this done, you need to get it with FedEx, the courier's coming to pick this up at X time, like amazing. So the paperwork was in good hands, and we were able to then travel up to New Jersey. So yeah, let's talk about that. So we hired a car and we packed up the house in Florida. We jumped in our car and we drove up to New Jersey. It's a fairly easy journey, actually. It did take us approximately 2 days. We did stay overnight in a location that for some reason I couldn't find any recollection or receipts for, but halfway up we stayed in a hotel. It was very basic. It was basically like we just slept and got back in the car again, you know. Two very exciting things. As a Brit, I had never been to a Buc-ee's before, so just there's nothing to do with the video, but there were two Buc-ee's en route, and I was very excited, and we of course stopped at both. And so my suitcases that I was bringing with me had some caramelized peanuts and some Buc-ee's pajamas added into them on the way. Also a great stop for the dog. They had some grass verges there and stuff, but yeah, just wanted to basically talk about the fact that I went to Buc-ee's for the first time ever, and it was fantastic. So we wanted to have a couple of days in New Jersey before we traveled. I wanted to give my dog a break from being in the car for 2 days, and then obviously didn't want to just jump straight onto a airplane. So we had a couple of days in New Jersey. We stayed in a place called Hasbrouck Heights, and the hotel was called Home 2 Suites. It was maybe like a 5-minute drive to Teterboro Airport, which is where K9Jets fly out of. This hotel, Home 2 Suites, was absolutely fantastic. They're pet friendly. They have breakfast included. Their lobby area is quite easy to come in and out of if you have a dog that's quite nervous around other people. So navigating around the hotel was really simple for us. The room that we were provided was like an apartment. It was huge. It had a kitchen in there. They would provide us with a hot stove to use. We were able to cook like the dog his meat. Definitely would recommend that hotel. So while we were staying in Teterboro / Hasbrouck Heights, we had to do our final vet appointment, which was for the worming tablet. This vet was absolutely fantastic. It was, as mentioned, 2 minutes from the hotel. It wasn't far at all. Pulled up. They knew everything. They knew all about us. They knew what paperwork we needed. They knew the flight we were on. And it was just so reassuring when we went in to know that this vet was just on top of it completely. So we walked in. She said, you're looking forward to your flight. We won't be here too long. We're just going to do a couple of things. We just got to do the worming tablet or the injection. You choose. We chose the injection just because my dog doesn't like tablets that much and he spits them out. So the vaccine shot was just a better option for us. She said, you can stay in the room if you want to. You can leave the room. Some of us get quite nervous in scenarios like that, so I love how she offered that. Everything was done, no issues. And then she basically said, okay, give me until I think tomorrow morning. She'll fill out the paperwork, stamp it, and we can go back. So that's what we did. Went back. Everything was perfect. Double checked with positive pet health certificate to make sure we had everything. And then we were green lighted. So at that point, we were provided the fit to fly or free to fly or confirmed to fly. I forget the terminology, by K9Jets. And now it was just a case of waiting a day or two until travel day, and we could put our feet up, we could relax because everything was sorted at that point. So we did take a trip into Manhattan once. It took about 30 to 40 minutes to drive in. It wasn't too bad. We basically stayed on the outskirts of Manhattan, but because it's like a grid, it was pretty easy to get around. We didn't go too far because we had the dog with us, but it was just nice to kind of get away from the hotel for a day, do a little bit of touristy stuff. So there's quite a few dog friendly shops there and cafes. So we did that. And then I'm trying to recall at what stage this happened at, but basically maybe like a week before. It could have been a few days less, but basically K9Jets provide a conference call with Adam to discuss basically the onboarding of the aircraft and things to expect. So he'll walk you through like the seating plan, food on board, pet food, what you can and can't bring on board, who's traveling, travel times, codes needed to get into the hangars in Teterboro, New Jersey, also codes for people to come into the hangars. Okay, this is actually audio during editing. I wanted to add this in quickly because I have no idea why I kept calling it a hangar. Pretty sure it's not a hangar. What I'm referring to is the like private jet terminal, the general area that you drive into where people get dropped off to go and pick up their aeroplanes. I'm assuming it's called a private jet terminal, but for some reason I kept calling it a hangar. I don't think that's the right name, so just making this edit here. Let's get back to the video. Thanks. In your arrival airport. So it was basically a Zoom call that walks you through everything top to bottom, and that was really helpful. There's also a PDF presentation that they'll provide with all the information. The first one we got had like dud information because certain things hadn't been confirmed. And then a little bit closer to travel day, we received a finalized one with codes. So when I talk about the pet taxi and traveling there, the code into the hangar at Teterboro I had to provide to them in order for them to get in to drop us off. So I think I'm covered everything, but I'm going to double check before we talk about travel day. So we've spoken about the research, the semi-private airlines and how we arrived here, the health certificate, the pre-health certificate to get that, the worming, the travel. Okay, here we are. So the flight we booked was traveling at 10 or 11 p.m. at night. So really I should have called this travel night, but I don't want to go back and change this image now. So just pretend that says night. Okay. And then I also had to provide the other code for whomever was picking us up in the United Kingdom so that they could drive in and pick us up. Again, I'll talk about that when we talk about the arrival portion. So we've jumped in the pet taxi, and it took approximately, let's say, 7 to 10 minutes. It wasn't far at all from the Hasbrouck Heights Home 2 Suites Hotel to Teterboro Airport. It was very quick. I had no idea what to expect when we arrived at the airport in Teterboro. I didn't really know what I was looking for. It's a little bit overwhelming travel day, especially if it's your first time, or at least for me it was. So I gave the code to the Uber driver who provided it to the speaker with the the barrier at the beginning. They just let us in, and then you're just in this like airport basically, or what would you call it? It's like it's like a huge place with lots of hangars and lots of like mini terminals, like private jet terminals. And so I had no idea where we were supposed to go. It's also pitch black because it was late. It was like 9 p.m. by the time we arrived, maybe a bit later. So we're looking around and we see a terminal that kind of looked where we were supposed to go. Again, there's no signage for K9Jets, at least that what we could see. We didn't see any signage. It could have been because it was dark and it wasn't that obvious where we were supposed to go. Anyway, we pulled up to this like terminal entrance, and all of a sudden the trunk of the car opens and my bags are whisked away, and I'm thinking, where am I going? Where's everyone gone? And like everybody's dressed in like hats and long trench coats, and so not only is it dark, but you can't see these people. Well, I couldn't because it was so dark that I could barely make out their faces. And then, of course, my bags have disappeared. I have no idea where they've gone. Um, Probably to be scanned, I'm assuming. I don't know, but my bags were whisked away. Don't know where they went. Was kind of greeted by a voice. Again, had no idea who said it because I couldn't see anything. It was so dark. My dog was getting quite nervous because you've got like 5 or 6 people all flustering around the car, pulling your bags out, which is wonderful, don't get me wrong. But it was a bit much. It was so dark that, I mean, I don't know if there was much they could have done. They can't change the time of the day. But having a nervous dog and having people who you basically can't see was a little bit overwhelming. So there's just something to note there. And then, of course, when I walked inside the building, I didn't know where to go. It wasn't that obvious to me. Now, you have to imagine this whole journey from the health certificate up has been like quite stressful. We're now there, we're about to get on this aircraft. I don't know what to expect. My dog's nervous, so his leash is like wrapped around my leg, my arm's stuck in my coat. It was not how I wanted to arrive at a private jet terminal, but ultimately this is what was happening. So I was a little bit flustered, I'll be honest. And so I walk inside and I'm not quite sure where to go. There are people walking around, but I still don't see any signage for K9Jets immediately walking in. Maybe there was something there that I missed, but there wasn't really an obvious sign that says like K9Jets this way, follow this arrow, because your brain can only cope with so many things right now because you're so stressed. There was nothing like that. So I had to ask somebody. I don't even know who I asked. I don't know if they worked there or whether they were just traveling, but they pointed me in the right direction. walked down to the end of the corridor and found where I was supposed to be in the waiting area. So when I approached the waiting area, there were maybe 6 dogs there. There were 2 cats. One of the dogs was sat on one of the owner's laps waiting. 3 of the dogs were, I think they were related, so they were all together. There was another dog kind of saying hi to everyone. My dog decided he didn't like a particular dog, so we'd just spend the entire time growling at this other dog, which was not a great start. But there we are. And to be honest with you, I was worried about that. So my dog's quite nervous. I've mentioned this before. I didn't know what to expect. I wasn't sure if we were going to be like thrust into being friendly with everybody, which in that environment is what you want, but there are workarounds. So when we had the call with K9Jets before, I mentioned this was his first time traveling on an aircraft. He's very nervous. I don't know what to expect. He's never been in this environment before, but I want to make sure that he's safe and everyone else is safe. So I want to be, take as many precautions as possible. I certainly don't want to give him calming meds because I don't know how he would react to them. We didn't have enough time to test them. So basically, what were our options here? And we were told that they would position us on the aircraft where he has a little bit more space, not a huge amount, I'll talk about this, but that he's not like in direct sight of other dogs and things like that. So they do their best with that. And they also make sure that every owner and pet has a muzzle on them just in case. So we had a muzzle with us, which we did not have to use, but that is something that they ask you. Everybody has to bring a muzzle just in case. So having those 2 things, having the slightly separate seating area plus the muzzle, just made me feel a little bit better that there were options here and they weren't kind of turning their nose up at basically nervous dogs. So we're in the waiting room. We've spoken about all this. They took my passport away for the pilot to double check. Basically, they take your passport, they give it to the pilot. The pilot runs checks on it. Well, I don't know what they do, but they double check the name, I guess, against the manifest. And then once that's approved, they take your hand luggage from you. So any handbags, any dog bags, they'll take that onto the aircraft for you, so you don't have to carry it. Again, this was things like I didn't know. So I'm, the whole time I'm sat there waiting and nervous. I'm thinking, I've got to carry my dog up the steps of the aircraft. I've got to carry my little bag with all his treats in and such, and I was like, oh my god, I'm like, am I gonna fall? Like, honestly, the nerves were crazy. But they take all that off you, so you don't have to carry anything. They'll carry your laptop, your iPad, your whatever. I think the only thing they don't really carry is your dog, but I'm sure if you asked they would. Just before we got on the aircraft, we were given about I want to say like a 10-15 minute warning that they were getting ready to board us and to like get ready. So, we'd gone through the calls, we'd spoken about dogs being nervous, dogs being happy, some were playful, some were not. But we'd got this far and we're in the waiting room, and, the nervous dogs were kind of kept separate, the happy dogs were together. Great. There was a bit of a miss, I think, from K9Jets here, whereby when we were getting on, or maybe not, maybe this is just my opinion, but there was a shuttle bus that took us from the terminal to the aircraft. So you've gone from having like enough space to move around and turn your dog away if he gets nervous or, a bit feisty or whatever. And then all of a sudden you're on this tiny bus where you can't move. So everybody was stressed on this. Even the people with the dogs that were happy-go-lucky, bouncy, little, wonderful sunshine dogs, even they were nervous on this bus, because you have to imagine, you've got, let's now say, 10 humans who are all stressed. I've traveled a lot. Traveling doesn't stress me out, but traveling with my dog in this environment where I just didn't know what to expect from beginning to end, like whatever it is that you put off, is it pheromones? Probably not pheromones, but whatever like you're giving off when you're stressed, you're giving it off, you're giving it to your dogs. Everyone else is doing the same. They're giving their stress to their dogs. Their dogs are stressed. So it's just like a bus of stress, basically. I don't know why they didn't allow people to do it in like slightly smaller journeys. I don't think it would have hurt to have taken like the family with 5 pets first, and then maybe like me and the other nervous dog, but so there's only 2 of us in the bus next. Maybe they could have split that up. I think it would have taken a lot of pressure off people. But again, they're running a smooth ship, and it all worked out. It was just a little bit stressful. It was a 5 minute journey of stress. Maybe it was 2 minutes. It felt like 20. So now we've done the bus journey. You know, it was a short-lived thing, but I just wanted to mention it because it's something I think is important. So now we're on board, or we're getting on board. They basically board from the back of the plane to the front of the plane. So me and my dog were sat at the back of the plane here. We're basically, the camera angle of the photo on this page is exactly where we sat. So we were facing the front, but we had a table in between us. So I was able to put my dog by the window and strap him in. I was on the outside. Opposite us was another dog, but you've got an entire table in between, and then the owner. The other thing here was that it was so late that most of the dogs were falling asleep, so they weren't really causing, they weren't really disturbing other dogs because most of them were sleeping. So we're on the aircraft, everybody's now boarded, they walk through, you put your seatbelt on, and we're ready for takeoff. Whoosh, fantastic. Like I mentioned, I have a pretty nervous dog. Every dog, including myself, quite nervous on takeoff. I've traveled commercial airlines and all different size aircraft. I've never been on a private jet before. The feeling of takeoff from an aircraft of this size feels completely different. It's a little bit like being on a roller coaster ride, if I'm honest. I don't know if you remember like those banana boat rides where it makes your stomach kind of feel a bit like woozy when you're like dropping and then coming back up. It was absolutely fine. Just the speed of it, you can really feel it when you're taking off, or at least I could. I love traveling, I love flying, so it didn't really bother me, but it did bother my dog, and he got quite skittish and tried to like get down from the seat. So I was, trying to smooth him and calm him down and so forth. That period honestly didn't last that long. Barely, it was just the initial takeoff. Once we were kind of in that moment of reaching altitude, he was fine. And then obviously as it leveled out, I didn't have any issues at all with him. Other than, I guess the guy opposite would probably disagree. I think once or twice he turned around to the dog opposite and gave him a little growl. Um, I was constantly apologizing for his one or two growls that he gave, but that was it. I think he was just trying to show his assertiveness with his little legs, and maybe he's got small man syndrome. I'm not quite sure, but we did okay there. He ate some treats, and then ultimately I couldn't sleep on this flight, even though it was overnight. I was nervous. But my dog fell asleep. I tucked him into my jacket, and yeah, he basically slept for the whole. I think it was like 5.5 hours. It wasn't that long, maybe 6, but maybe like 6 door to door. It was a really short flight, in my opinion. They did hand out some sandwiches. I'm vegetarian, so they offered some vegetarian options. Honestly, with the timing and the nerves, I just couldn't eat it. But it was quite a nice option. They also had a basket of treats on board that you could delve into and eat. Most people slept. Everyone, at least on our aircraft, were helping each other. So when I mentioned my dog was really nervous, nobody made a point to like really get in his face. Everybody was doing their best to suit each dog and each dog's personality, which I thought was lovely. And that was one of the reasons why I kind of am happy I went with K9Jets, because as much as it was stressful, this would have been 1,000 times worse on a commercial jet airline. So journey went ahead as possible. The only part where my dog got a little bit nervous again was on landing, because it was kind of the same feeling as takeoff, where you can really feel the speed of it on landing and takeoff. So again, he started jumping up and getting quite nervous on landing, but ultimately, you're talking maybe 5 minutes. It wasn't too bad. And then we were on ground, and oh my God, the relief until we were told that the UK side of the pet, I forget what they're called, but like the USDA equivalent in the UK, when they arrive, they basically come on board, double check your pet, and scan their microchip. Now, okay, so we've made it to the UK, but we had gone through the stress of the health certificate, we had gone through the stress of traveling, we had gone through the stress of the pet certificate, we had gone through the stress of the pet taxi. We had gone through the stress of arriving in the terminal. We had been on the bus. I thought it was over. It wasn't. So now we're on the aircraft. My dog is so stressed from the landing. So are all the dogs. And this lady from, I wish I could remember the name of it. Anyway, basically the person that like scans it and makes sure that you are who you say you are and that they're approved to get off the aircraft. So she comes on board. The second this lady steps on board this aircraft, my dog goes absolutely crazy. He's growling. He's trying to get off the seat. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, we have just gone through 2 weeks of paperwork and calls and paying all this money, and we've made it through the flight. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, my dog's going to ruin it in this final section. Like, when I say my heart rate was through the roof, I think if I'd have laid on the floor, I would have been like bouncing like I was on a trampoline. My heart was going so much. So this lady's working her way through the aircraft. So they're working front to back. We're last. And she's scanning them and they're having a conversation and all the dogs are licking this lady, you know, and my dog is not having it. He does not like this lady one bit. I wish I had thanked this K9Jets stewardess more at the time. Obviously, just getting off this aircraft was my priority. But she leant over into my ear and just said, don't worry. Dogs don't like her. Her energy's off. Just dogs don't really get on with this lady. So don't worry. She's used to it. It's always like this on arrival. So immediately that put me at ease, because I'm thinking like this lady's going to go, nope, sorry, your dog's barking too much or he's growling too much. Back to the States, you know. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we've just spent weeks and weeks so organizing all of this and he's going to ruin it with like barking and growling or whatever. Anyway, she makes her way through. Luckily, I knew exactly, well, maybe not luckily, but I think it helped, exactly where his microchip was positioned. So once she got to us, she actually has the microchip scanner on a long stick. So for dogs like mine that got a bit nervous on arrival, I guess, she basically uses the long stick. So he didn't even see this lady by the time she got to the back of us. I let her know exactly where it was. She put over the little scanner thing, beep, beeped him, thumbs up, ready to go. We were approved to get off the aircraft. And I can't tell you, the relief at that moment was insane. But it gets even better at this point. I mentioned the gate code that you provide to people picking you up. So basically the people picking you up can drive as a convoy to the aircraft. So you don't even have to like go into a terminal. So I had my parent pick me up. So her car was parked down there. I did have to navigate down the stairs with my dog, which was a little bit nerve-wracking because I hadn't had any sleep. So my legs were like jelly, and also the nerves and all the stuff that had gone on with this microchip scanning lady. So I was a bit like, you know, nervous walking down the stairs. But K9Jets did take off all of our luggage and place it into the vehicle. So we didn't have to do anything there. They took all of my hand luggage off and placed that into the back of the car. And they also put the goodie bag that they provide you into the car. So basically all you have to do is get off with your dog or cat, get in the vehicle, and then you basically drive as a convoy to the exit. They just double check. They ask if you've got anything on you, like a customs question, which obviously all I had was my dog. They knew that. So you just say no, unless you have got something, of course, then you declare it. We didn't. So you get there, you go to the end, and then they just say goodbye. And then the barrier just lifts up and you're in the United Kingdom. You're in Farnborough Airport. And from there, you're basically free. So you can go home if that's what you're doing. You can go to your hotel if you're on vacation. Like, you're basically in the UK, you're done, your paperwork's done, you've traveled, you've arrived, and you are greenlit. And off you pop to the service stations to get a well-deserved coffee, because believe me, it's deserved and welcomed. And so we did. We went to get a cappuccino to celebrate. So thumbs up. And just to like finish off this video, I think now in hindsight, had I known that Positive Pet Health Certificate were going to be as good as they say, I think I would have been a lot less worried about like the timing and whether we were going to get the paperwork back on time and whether it was going to be filled out correctly. I think having worked with them now and knowing how thorough they are, if I ever had to travel in this manner again, I would 100% book through them and just let them take the wheel, and I wouldn't worry one bit because they're just so fantastic. The other thing is K9Jets as well. I think if I'd have known that they were like open-minded to different types of dogs, that they were welcoming of all kind of dogs, and they help you out depending on the type of dog you've got and their temperament. I think if I'd have known that from the beginning, I would have felt a lot less stressed as well. Just having a friendly face on the aircraft that just kind of leans over and says like, hey, it's okay, dogs get stressed, don't worry about it. I just having that just made such a difference. And if I'd have known prior to traveling or booking, I think I probably would have been a little less stressed. But yeah, like I say, this was an amazing journey. I can't thank K9Jets enough. My dog's very happy now. Yeah, if anyone has any questions on this journey, drop them in the comments below. I will try my best to answer. Obviously, a lot of this is like rules and regulation based, so there might be some things I can't particularly answer, but might be able to point you in the right direction. Or just if you have any other things that maybe I've missed out, put them in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and hope to see you again soon. Bye.